I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Micah, can you give me a hand with this? No, I have them on screen. And while he's handing that out, just a real quick reminder, if you have any questions, not just about Revelation, but God or the Bible, anything like that, put it in the question box. So as we're getting ready to get into Revelation, there's two things that I want to kind of hit on very, very quickly. The first is found in Jeremiah 10, 1 through 2. Which says, "Hear the word that the Lord has spoken to you, house of Israel. This is what the Lord says. Do not learn the ways of the nations, or be terrified by signs in the heavens. Although the nations are terrified by them, for the customs of the people are worthless. Someone cuts down a tree from the forest. It is worked by the hands of a craftsman with a chisel." And I'll just stop right there. But what this passage is talking about is astrology and idol worship. They are building idols that they're making, and they're inquiring of the stars as to what's going to happen with the future. So, unfortunately, what has sometimes happened in studies of the end times by different pastors and whatnot is it's turned into, and I've mentioned this before, kind of like a Christian astrology, where, like, take for instance the red moons. There were like 4 red moons in a year, and people really ran wild with that. And trying to say what the significance was and tying it into end times prophecy, and then kind of trying to say what was going to come from that and whatnot. And here's the thing. When the end comes, the moon will be turned red. The Bible is clear about that. Okay. Now, whether that is something that is a temporary thing or just something that happens to the moon, we really don't know, whether it's the atmosphere or whatever. But that doesn't mean that the only time that the moon will be red is in the end, though. It doesn't mean that if there's a red moon, it's the fulfillment of what Revelation says. And so with that being said, my main point here is something being reminiscent of something doesn't mean that it is the fulfillment of the thing. Like, I'll give you an example. If I say Todd is a white man, therefore all white men are Todd. Well, just because there's a red moon, a blood moon, whatever, doesn't mean that it is that every red or blood moon is a fulfillment. It might be reminiscent of the end times. That doesn't mean that it is the fulfillment of the end times. The second thing I want to mention is last week, I believe it was last week, I mentioned about the possibility of the big one, the great earthquake, right? Everybody's been talking about this since I was a kid, probably from before then. And I just wanted to give a few clarifications on that, okay? Because some people have kind of let their imaginations go wild and kind of taken it past what science actually tells us. First off, a lot of times when people are talking the big one, they're talking about an earthquake that scientifically I'm just not even sure if it's even possible. The biggest earthquake you can have is like a 9.5, 9.7. So when you hear these people talking about magnitude 10 or magnitude 12, I mean, I don't even know if that is physically possible. Like, I'm not, well, I guess I'd be it's not a geologist, that's a, what is that one called? The one that does the size, it could be? Well, the one that knows about seismology. Either way, I'm not one of them, whatever they're called. But it is doubtful whether magnitude 10 is even, possible. And the reason why is because of the lengths of fault lines. You may have big fault lines that cross one another, and you might even have some that set off other ones, but that doesn't mean you can have this infinite long fault line that's going to cause us magnitude 10 or greater. I'm not even sure that's possible. Now, hypothetically, maybe that could change in the tribulation. But there is something called a doublet. Then that's like I just mentioned, where there's one after another, where there's 2 fault lines and they kind of oversect, and so the one will hit the other one and it'll kind of cause 2 9+ magnitude earthquakes. But that doesn't mean, once again, that we should go wild and start coming up with all these wild theories, okay? the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when people talk about the big one hitting California, they usually talk about it in these fantastic terms. Like, you can tell that they haven't actually studied it, but they just have these theories that sound good. So with that being said, California, even when the big one hits, if the big one hits, California will not go into the sea. That was just a joke I was saying last week, because that's what people say. The fault line doesn't go that way. California will go north towards Washington, not west towards the sea. Okay, so just to clarify that. Anyways, and that might not matter to you. You might say that was a complete waste of time, but to me, I care about the little details like that. It matters to me. So last week we looked at, we finished looking at the first of the interludes, which came between the sixth and the seventh seal. Then we looked at the seventh seal, which kind of started kicking us off towards the introduction to the trumpets, and so we'll be into the trumpets today. Micah, can I have you help with this? And Teresa, can you come too? So we'll be starting in verse 6 of chapter 8 and going into chapter 9, and I'm going to have some little people help me with the reading tonight. You guys can just sit here, and that way I'll keep handing it back to you, okay? And I'll look it up for you. Okay. It starts. Here's chapter 8. And verse 6 is right there. Okay. Can you hold this while you're doing it?
Yeah. And then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and hail and fire mixed with blood were hurled to the earth. So a third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet. Oh, right.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll go on to the second in just a minute. But before we get there, let's do 2 things. The first thing is let's look at a series of questions, and the second thing is let's kind of summarize what the first trumpet is. So first, we'll start off with the questions. 3 specific questions. When we're reading through the book of Revelation, there are at least 3 questions that come to mind. The first is, will God use natural or supernatural means, or is he going to use both? For instance, when it says that the moon will be turned to, will be turned, the blood moon, the moon will be turned red. Is that a natural phenomenon that we're going to be able to experience? Is it symbolism? Is it a supernatural event where God touches the moon? What's actually happening there? Because what happens is, inevitably, is we interpret based off of our own personal history. Let's say, for instance, I am a liberal. Can I see the Bible? Let's say, for instance, I'll turn it back. Let's say I'm a liberal. I've never been in church. I was not raised in church. And I get saved, and I read a passage like this in Micah. Micah chapter 7, verse 13 says this. Then the earth will become a wasteland because of its inhabitants and as a result of their actions. So me, being someone who did not grow up in the church, who, believes in things like, global warming and those kinds of things, I'm going to read a passage like that, and because, like I just said, we interpret based off our own personal history, I'm going to interpret that as global warming. Surely this is talking about global warming and how it's going to make a wreck of the earth, because I'm going to see things as it's a natural event that was man-made, so in my mind, that's going to be the fulfillment of that. Now, if I am not a liberal, I'm going to read that different. See what I mean? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. So if global warming is real, and if it is a sign of the end times, the good thing is we can't do anything about it, so there's no reason to really worry about it. Or you'd go to Revelation chapter 16, verse 12, and I'm not going to turn there, but it talks about the way that the Euphrates is going to dry up to make way for the kings of the east, or the multitude of the east, or whatever. And when we look at global events, the Euphrates is currently in the process of drying up. It's actually never been this low in recorded history. So that's from a number of different causes. Obviously, there's been lower rainfall. That's something. But then also, I believe it's Turkey and Syria are damming it up in the higher upper places, so it's making it dry up in the lower places. So is this what we're seeing now, the Euphrates drying up? If these things are happening, like global warming and all these things that these news sources are talking about and whatnot, do they play a part in the end times or in the development of the end times? Are they at all related? And is it a supernatural cause or a human cause? I mean, if you look at a lot of the discussion of global warming revolves something along like this. Global warming is absolutely real. There's no other way to interpret the information, and it is entirely 100% man's fault. That's how the majority of the discussion is going. I think everybody would agree with me on that. So, as we're looking at this, if these things are really happening, do they play a part in the end times or do they not? The next question, are these things happening now for the tribulation, like they're setting up for the tribulation, or are we in the pre-tribulation or the tribulation currently? That takes us to a whole bunch of different arguments, a whole different bunch of different things. The reason why I bring this up is because you're going to hear a lot of people talking about how we are in the tribulation now, and so I would be remiss if I didn't mention it as well. I personally don't believe that is on the money. I don't think we are in the tribulation. I don't think things are quite that bad, And I think that when we're in the tribulation, it's going to be much, much, much worse. But in Thessalonians, it tells us that the return, that the end is dependent. What's going to have to happen first is before Jesus returns, the man of lawlessness will be revealed, and then Jesus will return. And also, with that being said, about whether it's happening now or later, will they happen later to a greater degree? Like, for instance, maybe the Euphrates is drying up, okay, and it's not related to the Euphrates drying up in Revelation. So these things are worth considering. And the third question here, do these things happen in an instant or over time? So, for instance, when Jesus breaks the seal, is that happen right then in the same time, the same moment of time? Or is it something that happens, it's set in motion, it takes years or even generations to develop? We don't really know. Has Jesus already opened the seals at this point and the effects just haven't truly been felt yet? Is that what's being said? Because it seemed to be talking like that way when we see Jesus, who's worthy? They're looking for someone worthy, and then here's a slaughtered lamb, and it's just like, well, maybe this has something to do with that. I personally don't feel like that is true, but it's worth mentioning. Are there actually real seals being opened, or is it just a teaching aid that Jesus is giving us? So in other words, there's really no seals that Jesus is literally opening. It's just something that God is showing us to help us understand what's happening. And then the last question related to this instant fulfillment bit is, what did they believe back then? When John was writing this, how did the church interpret this? Did the church believe that this was something that was happening right then, or did they feel like it was something that was happening in the future? Because a lot of the things in the book of Revelation, they were already seeing minor fulfillments of, like, for instance, with Emperor Domitian. So, moving on from there, as we're going through the book of Revelation, make sure to focus on the big picture rather than the pieces that you don't understand. And that's going to be absolutely essential when we're getting into the trumpets, because there's going to be a lot of things in the trumpets that really are hard to understand. But if you just focus on the big picture, even though you're not going to get the individual pieces of the 7 trumpets, it's going to be a lot easier to understand the main thrust of it, the main idea of it. As far as the trumpets themselves, the trumpets serve 2 basic purposes. The first is to warn. Hey, God's wrath. But I don't know if this is really ironic. It seems like maybe it's actually just right in line, but the people don't seem to take it at all. They just seem to be uncaring. The trumpets, whatever. We're just going to keep on doing what we're doing. The trumpet blast doesn't do anything that really turns the heart of the culture or the generation. The second use of the trumpet is to announce this is what is happening, kind of like prepare the way. And still, like I say, no repentance. The second thing to mention about the trumpets as we get going into them is that there are a lot of similarities between the 7 trumpets and the plagues of Egypt. Obviously, that's not a one-for-one carryover, but there is a lot of similarities there. And obviously, the main point being the wrath of God punishing non-believers. So then the last thing about the trumpets, will people hear them on earth or not? Because there really is no reason to assume that people would hear the trumpets, but traditionally people talk about it as though they will hear it, and it's just something that's not really spelled out, it's not really clear. So it's something worth considering, but we really don't have much to give as a final answer on that. Moving on from there, and we can get on to the first trumpet that we just read through. What does the first trumpet judgment actually look like? When we read it, it says, okay, they're blowing the trumpets, and it says that there's hell and fire mixed with blood, and it's hurled to the earth. What does it actually look like? Is this something that is a literal description? It's very unclear. We don't really even know what that means. What we do know is that we know the result, and the result is this. It spreads drought with barren areas. That's what we know. It says here, a third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So it's affecting the life on earth. That takes us to the second. You want to do the second reading? That takes us to the second trumpet.
The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain ablaze with fire was hurled into the sea. So a third of the sea became blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed.
All right, so that takes us to the second trumpet. And once again, we have a lot of questions that aren't really overly clear. Is it literally turned to blood? Or is this like another symbolic kind of thing? We don't really know. What is this mountain-like thing that gets thrown to the earth? Again, don't really know. Do people on earth see this thing? Again, do not know. But once again, we can focus on the effect. We can focus on the bit that we do understand, and that's that there's massive sea change. The seas are affected to such a degree that it affects the property of destruction. So it says that ships are destroyed. So that's probably going to have some kind of an effect on trade life. And then it also mentions that sea life itself is affected. So this is something that is, causing destruction. Excuse me. And then before we get to the third trumpet, we have to kind of point out the fact that are the trumpets tied together in cause and effect? Because if you remember, the first one started out with the whole, blood and hell, and here again we have the blood and the water. So is that the same blood that was come down in the hell? Is that related? Are they together in that, or are they to be seen as separate things? It takes us to the third trumpet, which is in verses 10 through 11.
Third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star blazing like a torch fell from heaven. It fell on a third of the rivers and springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood. So many of the people died from the waters because they had been made bitter.
So now we get to the third trumpet, and the main idea of what's happening is the poisoning of the water. So to give you maybe a real-world example of how this kind of stuff could happen, nowadays what they're talking about is PFAS. That's forever chemicals that are getting into the water. It's getting into the groundwater, too. And when you drink water that's contaminated with this, which is getting to be more and more water, even bottled water, it causes a lot of illnesses and sicknesses, liver failure, obviously kidney failure can cause IBD and those kinds of inflammation diseases and whatnot. So this is something, and it might not even be related to this, but I'm just showing you how something like that could be like a wormwood where it makes the water bitter and people are dying from it. So it's just something like that. Now, once again, do I really think that the PFAs are the same as this? I don't know. It could be. I have no idea. I'm just saying it's a similar thing. Now, but that takes us to the idea of this wormwood. Is the wormwood something specific? Or is it just a star? Okay, so this is what I'm saying. All throughout Revelations, things are called stars that aren't really stars. And we're going to see this in chapter 9 again. So is this an actual star? And does it actually literally fall and hit the earth that people can see it? Or once again, is this one of those symbolic things happening like the incense being thrown to the earth that people on earth don't really see? And that's the heart of a lot of what we're looking at tonight. Are these things that people on earth see them as they are described? Or is John describing them in such a way that people on earth do not know what's happening? They do not see this. Is John, because if you've been paying attention, John is relaying this information like he is in heaven the whole time. So is he seeing things as they happened, or is he seeing symbolism, or what is going on there? And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But I want to warn you against demythologizing. This is a big, complicated way of saying a very simple idea. So the idea is this, where you try to take the supernatural out of the event. Okay? So you're trying to make it where you can explain it by natural means. When you're reading through Revelation, be careful not to demythologize, because for whatever reason, God gave it to us in this kind of harder to understand symbolism, this certain type of writing, this literature, this apocalyptic literature style. For whatever reason, he chose to give it to us in that. Maybe it, obviously served his purpose best, which is fine. But what I want to warn against is where you try and, let's try and give natural explanations of everything and try to make everything decode it. So, and you're going to see what I'm talking about here in just a minute when we get to the locusts. But I just want to warn you against that. So getting to the last of the trumpets in the shorter sections is the fourth trumpet, and that's in verses 12 through 13.
The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. I looked and heard an angel or eagle flying high overhead, crying out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those who live on earth, because of the remaining trumpet blasts that the three angels are about to sound."
All right, thanks, kiddos. Give them a hand. They won't be with us for the next couple weeks because it's something they'll be working on over at Waymaker. But I wanted to be sure to include them before they head off. So now we get out of the first, the trumpets are broken up into two sections. The first four, which as intense as they are the mild ones. All those bad things that we just read about, they're the mild ones. But now we get to the last three of the trumpets, and they're called the three woes. So we'll get to the first of the woe tonight. We will not get to the second or the third. But what's actually happening in the fourth trumpet? Well, again, it's a little bit unclear because it says about how a third of the sun's going to be darkened. How do you have a third of the, or was it a fourth? I'm sorry, hold on. Yeah, a third of the sun. How do you have a third of the sun darkened? How is that possible? Well, before we get into that, remember that apocalyptic literature is not written to be precise, literal. This is actually common types of imagery that is in apocalyptic literature from outside of the Bible. And so when we're reading it, we should keep in mind that that's what it is. So maybe it's talking about atmospheric changes. We talked about that possibility a week or so ago. Maybe it's talking about cosmic disturbances. We really don't know which of these two. Whether it's talking about something that's happening in the universe or on the earth. We really don't know. But whatever it is, it will likely have some sort of effect on the earth. If we're talking about like something going into the atmosphere that's making the earth seem a third darker than it is, if that's what it's talking about, then yeah, that would definitely affect crops. It would definitely affect people's health. If it's talking about something that is not actually visible, then it's hard to know what it's really talking about then. If it's talking about something that's actually happening to the sun, well, that's going to change things too. So no matter how you look at it, there's probably going to be some big changes from this. But don't get too worried when you read something in apocalyptic literature like Revelation that seems to be impossible, because it really does use a lot of non-literary things to talk about. So remember to interpret it within the genre. You wouldn't interpret the Psalms as the book of the law. You wouldn't interpret the books of wisdom as apocalyptic. You remember to interpret it according to the kind of genre it actually is. But symbols, the symbols that we're seeing here for these things might look a lot different when they actually happen. We've probably all heard about the star Wormwood falling to Earth, countless times. I would imagine we all have. I know I have. And I've heard a lot of pastors even turn this one small section into a whole big series. So, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with it. But when it actually happens, it might not look the same as we have all imagined it in the many times we have heard it. That's what I'm getting at. But here, things have kind of ramped up. Did I already put that down there? Yes. You have an increase, so the reality might look a bit different. Okay. You have an increase in the seals. It wasn't all of the seals, but on one of the seals it said that a fourth of the earth was affected. Well, here we've gone from a fourth to a third, which is obviously more than a fourth. And so then the question becomes, well, is it the same 1/3 of the earth that is affected by all four of these things? Well, I'm assuming not, because it says that 1/3, one of them happens in the waters, which is, I believe, the second trumpet. Yes, the second trumpet happens in the water, and the first trumpet happens on land. So I'm guessing it's not the same 1/3 of the earth. So scattered areas of earth that never are affected over a third of the earth. You see what I'm saying? A third of that section. You get what I'm saying? I hope you see what I'm saying, because I'm saying it very poorly. But either way, the whole earth is not afflicted in every single case. And so again, I mentioned this before, it's worth mentioning again. Again, we have God withholding his wrath from even though there's no reason for him to withhold his wrath, he's still withholding his wrath. So there's two ways that people look at the Book of Revelation and other similar parts of the Bible. The first one is they go in and they say, how could God do this? How could God cause so much destruction and harm and suffering? How could God, he's supposed to be good, and why is he not doing all this? But then there's the other group that go into this and say, well, thank God for his mercy. That even as he's doling out judgment and wrath, he's still doing it with patience and mercy. And really, there is no simple answer for this, because people, like I say, it's really about where your heart is at. If you're the kind of person who goes in with your guns a-blazing, how could God do this? He's an evil God then there's not much I can say to persuade you. But I think that the overwhelming example we see here is God is not someone that's pushed around, and eventually there is judgment because he is a just judge. However, he's also merciful even when he is meting out that wrath. So, John is faithfully relaying the information that he sees. He didn't make stuff up. This is exactly as he saw it. But will it actually look like this to those on earth? Did he see what it would actually look like, or did he see reproductions? Did he see a literal vision of it happening in the future? Or did he see something that God was giving him this that is just, what else to say? A reproduction of what's going to happen that isn't meant to be historically accurate, but is meant to get a message across. Does Jesus in heaven look like a slaughtered lamb? And most of the New Testament, when it talks about seeing Jesus, it's actually Jesus, and he's either seated on the throne or standing in heaven, is one of those two things happening. But here, we don't see him doing either of those. We see him as a slaughtered lamb in the book of Revelation. So right there, that tells us that there is a difference between what is seen and what actually literally is in the book of Revelation, oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes. So if Jesus might not actually look like a slaughtered lamb when we see him in heaven, maybe these things aren't going to look exactly like this when it happens. Is it literal or symbolic? Will it actually look like this to those on earth? And then the last thing before we go to the next section, the fifth trumpet, I got to say this because there's always that person somewhere that's convinced that America made it into the end times revelation, so they try to sneak it in there somewhere. No, the eagle is not America, okay? Just, no. I mean, there's always that very slim chance, but no, there's no reason to assume that. He's just saying that there's an eagle going and saying, woe, woe to those on earth. If you try to make this be America, you really got to do all kinds of gymnastics. You mean to tell me that America in the end times, we're still going to be here, and we're going to be going and warning all the world that there's 3 more trumpet blasts? Like, that doesn't even make sense. But there's a lot of times that people, like I say, that you can make the Bible say anything you want it to say. We're trying to see what it actually says, though, not insert our opinion of what we want it to say. So with that being said, no, I really don't think that that the eagle is America. Are there any questions about this section? We looked at 4 trumpets. Okay, so the next section is the 5th trumpet. This is what we're going to be closing on tonight. Can I have somebody read these 12 verses?
The 5th angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it, like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not allowed to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes. During those days people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold. On their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had a king over them. The angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon, that is, destroyer. The first woe is past. 2 other woes are yet to come.
Okay, so the 5th trumpet takes us to the first of the woes. And it starts off, there's this angel that blows a trumpet, and then it says that there's a star, and that falls from heaven to earth. That star, a great example of what we were talking about earlier, that star is an angelic or demonic being. I just said angelic being because demons are angels who have fallen. So I just put angelic being, and you can do whatever you want with that. It's unclear whether it's an angelic or demonic being. I'm assuming it's a demonic being, but we really don't know. And then it goes on to say about these locusts. Now, there's a couple things to mention about the locusts. Oh boy, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about them already, so I will try to save you the agony of repeating things you might have heard. Locusts were a very common plague in the Middle East. They still are a common plague in the Middle East. If you look at, biblically, they have been used to illustrate God's wrath. Like, for instance, take the book of Joel. who talks about, what the locust has left, this locust has eaten, what this locust has left, this locust has eaten. And he goes on like that for 2 or 3 chapters, and talking about basically how the locusts are a symbol for the armies that are coming in to destroy God's people. And so the precedent is already there for locusts to be a punishment from the Lord, like from the plagues of Egypt, and then also for the locust to be symbolic of armies. But that does not mean that the locusts have to be real locusts. That does not mean that they have to be real creatures at all. They can be symbolic. That's totally fine. Anybody who grew up in Sunday school knows that they've had some pictures, really creepy pictures of these weird-looking locust things with these scorpion tails on them. For those of you who went to Sunday school, you know what I'm talking about. But that's not necessarily what's going to be seen, but it's how he describes this thing. And he says very clearly here, I feel like this is skipped over a lot, the key for the shaft of the abyss was given to him. He opened the shaft to the abyss, and smoke came up out of the shaft like smoke from a great furnace, so that the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the shaft. Then locusts came out of the smoke onto the earth. Okay, so right there. The bit that the locusts are from the abyss. The idea there is that the locusts it's a demonic horde. It's not like animals that are just like he gathered a bunch of locusts from the 4 corners of the earth. It's a demonic horde. Now, notice that he says that they're only given power for 5 months. Locusts typically live 5 months in their adult form, so this would be right on par with the image of a locust. And they're not allowed to kill. They can torment or torture, however you want to say that, but they cannot kill. And so whether those 5 months are literally 5 months, like as we would count time, or whether it is just simply trying to get across the point that their time is limited, that it's not forever, I'm not sure. But either way, the effect of these locusts is, ouch, a lot of pain, a lot of pain, and it's so bad of pain that people want to die, which tells me right there it's probably not a very pleasant encounter. But that doesn't mean that necessarily everyone is bitten of the people who don't have the seal of God. Let me say it differently. So they're told to go out, and they cannot attack the grass, which I'll point out the significance of that in just a second. But they also cannot attack the people who are sealed by God, but only those who do not have the seal. So, with that being said, that doesn't mean that everybody who didn't have the seal was bitten. That just means that those who didn't have the seal were at risk of being bitten. So, because it never actually says in here that every single person that didn't have the seal of God was stung. So, keep that in mind. Some people have said, well, maybe this is some kind of a plague, like the what's it called? The plague. Help me out here, guys. The bubonic plague, yes. Thank you. Goodness sakes. Black Death, yes, that thing. Some people have said maybe it was something like that. That if you were a good enough person, if you were righteous enough, you wouldn't have gotten the bubonic plague. But, the rest of them, they must have been sinners to have gotten it. No, I really don't think that this is talking about a plague. It's much less likely. It seems more likely that it's a spiritual army, maybe not even a physical army. But so whether that's physical, it's physically as well, I don't know, but definitely spiritual, and it's associated with warfare all throughout here. Look at what it's talked about. Their king is Abaddon, and then over here it talks about that they are like horses prepared for battle. Their wings are like chariot. It's just drawing up the imagery of warfare. So it seems most likely that it's not a plague, but rather a spiritual warfare. And whether that includes, how you would say that, whether it includes actual physical warfare or not is unclear. But moving on from there, the sun, it says that the sun is darkened, but keep in mind the sun isn't actually literally darkened. Rather, it's the smoke and the locusts that make it appear. It darkens the sun just from how much it is, okay? So once again, this is the way this is worded, it's likely that this isn't even something that people are able to see. Now, it says there very clearly that they were not allowed to kill the grass. The significance of that, the main point is that they are not there to ruin the crops or to bring drought and famine. Their purpose is to torture. Their purpose is for torment. That is what they're there for. When you think of locusts, you think of them eating all your crops. But he gets that across. No, they were not allowed to eat the crops or the grass. They were only allowed to torture. Now, with that in mind, keep in mind that chapter 8, verse 7 already told us that all the grass was dead. So here in chapter 9, it's saying that they're not allowed to attack the grass. You shouldn't say, there's a contradiction. No, not really, because like I already mentioned, apocalyptic literature is not aimed at being literal. It is trying to get points across. So just because chapter 8 told us that all the grass was burned up, that shouldn't mean that there's a contradiction in chapter 9 when it says there's still grass. Also, there is a slight possibility that there's a large separation of time between chapter 8 and chapter 9 where the grasses grew back, but I don't think that has much merit to it. Moving on. As we also see here, God's people are still there because it says here, only those people who do not have God's seal on their foreheads. That seems to imply, once again, in not so many words, that there are other people who do have the seal. So it seems like God's people are still there, so the rapture then would not have happened at this point. Let's see what else. It goes on to say that these people cannot die. This is kind of a big point, and unfortunately, again, there aren't a whole lot of answers. Some people have said because of technological advancement that we're going to be more like bionic people, that we won't be able to we'll have overcome sicknesses and stuff, and so we'll be in this great amount of pain and just not be able to die. Some people have tried to say that we're going to be incorporating AIs into our bodies through chips and stuff like that kind of stuff, where we won't be able to. The AI will prevent us from killing ourselves. I don't know about that. That sounds a little bit too sci-fi for me, but the theory's out there, so I'll tell it to you, and you can do whatever you want with it. Anyways, all we know is that death is somehow withheld from them, whether this is God intervening or something else, I don't know, but either way, they can't die, which is the last bastion of hope that the suffering man has is death, but these people are kept even from that. Now, it talks about their appearance in verse 7 that they were that the locusts were like horses, and it goes on through verse 10 to describe these locusts. And when it's talking about its appearance, I just want to point out that John is evidently having a hard time describing this. Maybe it's impossible to describe, but he's trying his best, and maybe he's failing to describe. I'll let you be the judge of that, but all that we have is this very vague definition of what these things look like. The appearance of the locusts were like horses prepared for battles. Something like golden crowns was on their heads. He didn't say there were golden crowns on their heads. It's something like it. I don't really know if that's what it was. Their faces were like human faces. They had hair like women's hair. Their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had chests like iron braces. So you can see him trying to use words that kind of get the point across. But with that being said, put a big hold on to rush in to fill in the blanks. What people do is they read this and they say, well, that's obviously ISIS, or that's obviously, the Muslim armies because of this. Hold on, just calm down, okay? Yes, it could be those things, but don't rush to fill in the blanks when the scriptures are not clear on it. And then also, don't forget that it was not written to be understood in your time. It was written to be understood in the first century, and you are reading an ancient document. So don't make that big mistake of thinking, well, I'm reading it today in 2026, so clearly he had 2026 in mind. Well, no, he didn't. I mean, what if Jesus doesn't come back until 6026? Well, then I'm sure people in 4026 are going to say, well, obviously this is talking about the thing that we're going through. And my point being, let's just don't rush to fill in the blanks when it's not clear. It is very reminiscent of the Parthian hordes that the Romans were fighting against, but I don't think that the Parthians were the locusts. I'm just saying it was reminiscent of them. Then it goes on to talk about who their king or their leader is, whatever you want to say there. And it gives them two names, but both names translate as destroyer. Whether you're reading it in the Greek or the Hebrew, doesn't matter. It's still the destroyer. There is a little bit of disagreement as to whether this is one of Satan's demonic generals or whether it is Satan himself. A little bit unclear. I don't think it really matters all too much which one it is. I think either way it gets the point across. But I do want to point out something about this. So here it says that their king is the destroyer. And the destroyer leads the locusts, to attack and persecute the people who aren't following God. And if they aren't following God, then they're following Satan. But Satan is the one who's torturing them. This is a bit of dramatic irony, I believe. Basically, here's the thing, and you can take this to the bank. Evil always turns on its own. If you're concerned about people coming against the church and how, what if this happens, what if it, don't. Because evil eventually turns on itself. All you have to do is trust God and endure the problem, and eventually, Satan's not going to stand for forever. A house divided can't stand. Like when people are doing evil things, when they're following their father Satan instead of our Father, they can't stand united. Okay, when splits come in the church, just hold on to God and He'll see you through. Evil always turns on its own. Like that's just what happens. This is no break from the standard of how evil operates. But the main idea from this fifth trumpet is this: there's a demonic army that causes pain. That's as far as we can really say without drawing too many conclusions. And I think that the main point is still the main point, even if you don't understand exactly what the locust is or any of that, So, anyways, moving on from there, John is not overcomplicating simple concepts. A lot of times when people read Revelation, they read it like this. Well, these things are happening, and then he gives us an overcomplicated explanation that we have to decode to get the simplified version again. Like this. This is what it looks like. The locusts are actually Putin's armies from Russia. Okay? And so now, John has said it in a very confusing way, so we have to decode that to find out that it's actually the Russians. Yes, it's the Russians that are coming. Yeah, that's what it was. Oh, okay. And that's a really big mistake to look at Revelation like that. John is not overcomplicating simple concepts. That's not what's happening at all. And the last thing I want to mention before we close up for today, there are a lot of things that we see that are coming in Revelation that we see them in part, but we do not see their complete fulfillment. Okay? Let me kind of give you some examples. We see really bad earthquakes. Okay, remember in 1960, there was a magnitude 9.5 earthquake that hit Chile, I believe, and it caused mass destruction. A couple years ago, I want to say probably in 2016, that sounds familiar, there was a big tsunami, caused all kinds of damage in the Philippines, the whole area. Or take that big nuclear explosion in Japan that caused all kinds of problems. Or take the world wars. I mean, there's global conflicts. These are things that, things like these will be happening in the end. And we see these things in part, but when they've reached their fulfillment or their conclusion or whatever, however you want to say that, in the end times are going to be much, much worse than that. I mean, even when we looked at the bubonic plague, that was devastating, just absolutely devastating. And yet, there's going to be things much worse than that in the end. So the summary of everything we looked at tonight, the trumpets drastically increased the punishment. I mean, the seals, they didn't sound like a walk in the park, but the trumpets really kicked it up into high gear. And now we're into the first of the woes. We'll get into the next woe next week, as well as the second of the interludes. And things go bad, very bad, very quickly. So were there any questions about tonight? Where you made it through 5 trumpets? Go ahead, Denny. What's the abyss? The abyss is basically a place for the evil spirits. It's mentioned in the Gospels, in Luke. Oh, geez, I don't remember where it's mentioned in Luke. But anyways, it's the part where Jesus is casting out the demon from the man, and he says, please don't send us back. They're talking about going back to the abyss, and so he puts them in the pigs instead. So it's some place of punishment that evil spirits go. Where is it? I have no idea. But it evidently is. It's also going to come into play later in the book of Revelation, where Satan is bound up there for 1,000 years. It's not the final end for bad people or anything. It's a place of torment for evil spirits. It is apparently separate from Hades, but sometimes it is equated as Sheol or the underworld or death sometimes, but apparently not in regards to people, only in regards to spirits. So keep that in mind. Maybe someday we'll get around to doing a more in-depth study of it. But does that answer your question? No, it's not hell. No. There's hell, which will be destroyed, and then there's the abyss, and then there's the end final judgment, and it's called, there's another name for it. It's called like the pit or something. It's slipping my mind right now. We'll get to it later in Revelation, but something about the fire. What? Lake of fire. There's lake of fire. The lake of fire is the eternal one. Hades is the one that will be destroyed. The lake of fire will not be destroyed. It'll be the one where people go for eternal punishment. And then the abyss, as far as I understand, will also be destroyed. We'll get to that later in Revelation, though. So does that answer your question a little bit better? Just remember it like this. Abyss, place for evil spirits. So you're not a demon. So you won't ever be there. So, okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, then in that case, Jason, can I have you close us in prayer, please? All right, thanks, Jason. So we'll pick up next week with the sixth trumpet and going into the second interlude. And then upcoming stuff, besides the other stuff I've been mentioning about praying for the diaper bank and the gift baskets for the schools, we have the men's breakfast, we have the men's breakfast on Saturday at 9. We'll be at Martin's Capital Cafe. If you can come, please do. And, yeah. So, okay. Have a great rest of your evening and a great rest of your week.